Hi, BookTube, it's Amy. I thought I would pick up with the bookshelf tour that I started about a month ago. It was early October when I showed you the first three layers of the shelf. And I thought I would continue on tonight with the bottom layer. Now, awkward as it is, I've reshuffled some things since I started that. So hopefully I'm not going to show you anything twice. Things are pretty much in the same order, in alphabetical order. But I did bring a few books into my apartment recently, and rather than move every single book over and down to keep things in alphabetical order, I've just started putting things wherever they fit. So as you can see, I've got a second layer just tossed on here, and I'm going to skip over most of these because they're ones I haven't read, so I don't really have anything to say about them. That's The Heart of the Matter by Graham Greene and The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford, which are a couple of books that I brought back with me from my recent vacation. Here is my copy of Bound in Venice by Alessandro Marzo Magno. This is a book about books, about bookbinding and book selling in the city of Venice and the history of the book trade within that city. For a time, it was one of the largest book producing cities in Europe. Quite an interesting book. Klee, that's one I showed in a recent haul. My copy of The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, which I haven't read. Go Down Moses by William Faulkner. My copy of ABC for Book Collectors by John Carter. I'm told this book is indispensable for anyone who wants to collect books. It is essentially a glossary of terms. So if you're looking at a auction listing or just a book listing online somewhere, you might come across terms such as first published edition, first separate edition, floated copy, fly leaf, fly sheet, fly title, etc. It's essentially a glossary of terms. Another book that I hauled recently, Castle Rackrent and Anew by Maria Edgeworth. Once again, haven't read that. So now we are getting into what properly belongs on this shelf. And I'm sorry if it's a little bit dark. This is down in the corner next to my chair. And as well, this is too low for the tripod to be effective. So a little bit of hand camera here with my phone in my hand. So up here we have The Light of Scarthy by Egerton Castle, author of Consequences. This was a book that I picked up for $1 at Black Squirrel Books this past summer, but I haven't gotten to it yet. Copyright 1899. I have a feeling it's probably not a very well-written book. I get the sense it may be on the melodramatic side, but I guess we'll see. It could be a fun read. Then in here we have Lady Alderley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braden. That one I have not read yet. I know a number of people read it for Victober, and I considered it, but never actually got to it. I have here a book called The Flesh Pots by Florence Branch. I have read this one. This is a book that I picked up last time I was in the States. This was inside someone's prescription from May 15th, 1946 for something called Petrolagen or Petrolarg? Petrolayer. I don't know. With this cursive is hard to read, but they were taking it daily, and it appears to be from Dr. doctor's writings. It looks like March, but the letters aren't quite there. But anyway, I just left that in there because I thought that was interesting. But this is sort of a popular, bordering on trashy novel published in 1944. And I did read it. It's quite a fun novel. It's about a young woman who grows up poor and has the desire to be not only wealthy, but a famous actress. She ends up going to Hollywood and has a love affair, but of course falls in love with the right man by the end. Then I have my copy of Villette by Charlotte Bronte. Probably my favorite Bronte novel. Better than Jane Eyre. Definitely beats Wuthering Heights. I can't stand Wuthering Heights, and I've read it twice. This would be my copy of Jane Eyre here. It's a battered up cloth edition. I don't even know the publication date on this. I paid $1 for it. At some point, I think it would have been the Elora book sale a few years back. I've never actually read this copy. This is an American edition. I've never read this copy, but I picked it up knowing that I'd like to have a copy in my collection, and it's something I will definitely reread again at some point. Yeah, I'm not sure when this edition is from, but published by the Book League of America, New York. I think the only time I read Jane Eyre, I read it when I was 14. So it's been 11 years. It's been 11 years since I read Jane Eyre. I have a copy of Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. I believe I also read this one when I was 14 or 15, but I can't remember anything about it at all. I have here my copy of Anita Brookner's Brief Lives, copy of Sex and the Single Girl by Helen Gurley Brown. This is sort of a fun manual of sorts. It was published in 1962, and there's chapters on women alone. Oh, come now. The availables, the men in your life, where to meet them, how to be sexy, 9 to 5, money, 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 the apartment, the care and feeding of everybody, the shape you're in, the wardrobe, kisses and makeup, the affair from beginning to end, the rich, full life. It's essentially a manual, sort of the kind of thing you would expect to find in a women's magazine or something. It's a manual telling single women how to thrive and how to live, everything from how to build a professional wardrobe, to how to furnish your apartment tastefully, to how to take advantage of the men in your life, which is a bit of a funny chapter, because she essentially says, use every man in your life, make them admire you, and use that admiration to get what you want and get where you want to go, without necessarily having sexual affairs with them. I like it because it's kind of a funny book to read, but there's also what I would call some useful advice in there regarding wardrobe and regarding how to furnish an apartment and feed your friends when they come over. I think probably the biggest piece of advice I took from that is the idea of saving up the money and spending the money on those quality pieces as opposed to buying a bunch of cheap junk. So for instance, Gurley Brown says that if you want to look nice, don't buy cheap jewelry. Spend the money on 1 or 2 tasteful pieces, and you'll look much better than if you spend less money on a bunch of cheap jewelry in an attempt to look expensive. As well, the advice about furnishing an apartment, about decorating in a tasteful way and not filling it with too much stuff. There's one passage that I always laugh at because she talks about making sure you have books because books make you interesting. So it's definitely of its time, but it's a very interesting and amusing book to read. I have my copy of Rita Mae Brown's Venus Envy. I read this book a couple years back. It is about a woman who is told that she is dying, and so she writes letters to everybody in her life announcing that she is a lesbian and telling them exactly what she thinks of them. The letters go out, and the only problem is she is not dying. The test results got mixed up, and she will be perfectly fine. But of course, now she has to deal with the aftermath of not only telling people what she thinks of them, but the aftermath of coming out to her friends and family. And this book was published in 1993. Then I have In Her Day, also by Rita Mae Brown. This is a novella about two women of differing ages. One is of the older generation. She is a professor and she is in the closet. And she meets a younger woman who is much more outgoing and vivacious and out. And their two worlds clash and their politics really clash. It's definitely a very political novel. It was first published in 1976. And that's actually one, I didn't enjoy it all that much, and I thought I would sell it to the used bookstore here, but they decided they didn't want it. I'm assuming because they didn't know what it was, because I thought it was one of the things they would go for, a 1970s era lesbian novel, but I guess not. I have here a biography of the young Vincent Massey. Haven't read that one either. Vincent Massey is a prominent Canadian. I believe he was a public servant, perhaps a diplomat. I picked it up because there are many locations in Canada and in Ottawa itself that are named after him. So for instance, where I did my undergrad, there was a Vincent Massey Hall, and there's a Vincent Massey Park here in Ottawa, so definitely someone who is probably worth reading about. So this novel is by Morley Callaghan. It's Never Over. Callaghan was a contemporary of Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. He actually knew both of them, spent some time in Paris about the same time they did. He famously used to box with Hemingway, and he had a bit of a tiff with Hemingway because at one point a newspaper published a story about Callaghan punching Hemingway and knocking him out. Callaghan obviously wasn't the one who spread that story, and that essentially caused a breaking off with Hemingway for a good while, and they lost touch not long after that. But he wrote many excellent novels and is sort of a can-lit giant. This particular one is about the friends and family of a man who is given the death penalty after he killed someone in what I think was a bar fight. So a tragic story in that regard. And this is, of course, a beautiful Laurentian Library edition with this interesting cover. Let's see, when was this one published? Yes, so the novel was published in 1930, and this particular edition is from 1972. And I'm seeing I'm about to run out of time here, so I didn't make it very far, half a shelf, but I'll be back soon with a continuation.